There's significant Chinese investments in Saudi Arabia and significant Saudi investments in China. So it makes perfect sense, certainly for those reasons, but also for other reasons for Saudi Arabia to strengthen this relationship. But again, I cannot stress this enough, that as we strengthen relations with countries like China or others in the region or elsewhere, these are not coming at the expense of our long-standing relationships with the United States and some of other allies.
This is the 966.
We are speaking now with Fahad Nazer, who is spokesperson for the Embassy of Saudi Arabia in Washington, D.C. Fahad was one of our first guests on the 966 back in 2021, and he was previously a contributor to publications like the New York Times, Foreign Affairs, Arab News, and even, of course, our website, sustg.com. Nowadays, as spokesperson for the embassy, he is quoted in too many publications to name here, and in the last year has had TV hits on CNN, MSNBC, PBS, and others. Fahad, welcome back. Nice to see you.
It's good to be with you again, Lucian, as always.
It is always good to be with you, and it doesn't seem that long. 2021, really.
No,
to be
time
honest.
flies. Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, although a lot has happened between 2021 and now, that's for sure. Certainly in the kingdom.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, the thanks to you and other tremendous guests, the 966 has really grown, and we're reaching a large audience. So this is a lot of fun, and this is sort of a little departure from our normal episode because we wanted to get some commentary on this big news. And so for context, Fahad, and our listeners, just as background. So on March 10th, as we all know, and you know very well, Fahad, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China announced a joint trilateral statement that an agreement had been reached between Saudi Arabia and Iran to, quote, resume diplomatic relations and reopen their embassies and missions within a period not exceeding 2 months, unquote. And a couple key points in this agreement, it included affirmation on all parties of the respect for the sovereignty of states, non-interference in international affairs of states. And they also agreed, and Fahad, as a student of relations in Saudi Arabia's foreign policy, they also agreed to implement a security cooperation agreement signed between them in April 2001, and the general agreement for cooperation in the fields of economy, trade, investment, technology, science, culture, sports, and youth, signed in May 1998. Fahad, sort of a broad statement. Can you provide, your perspective on this agreement? What should we make of this agreement? We're obviously looking at it from a U.S.-Saudi perspective, but we on the 966 are extremely interested in the Saudi take and the Saudi perspective on these things. It's a momentous agreement. What is your sense of how this came about and what it means?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast again, Richard, and I look forward to our conversation. So let me start by widening the lens a little bit. So as you know very well, it's my understanding that you were just in the kingdom very recently, so you know this better than most. Saudi Arabia is undergoing an amazing transformation that we call Vision 2030. With the vision, and its broad objectives are the empowerment of every segment in society, the development of every sector in the economy, and in many ways, we're also redefining what it means to deliver government services. So as all of these changes are taking place, as we're implementing the various elements of Vision 2030, a lot of things have changed. Obviously, like I said, you were in the kingdom, it sounds like last week. So the kingdom feels and looks very different. A lot of our laws have changed, a lot of our regulations have changed. A lot of our institutions have changed. However, having said that, what has remained remarkably consistent going back decades is our foreign policy. Saudi Arabia adheres strictly to the norms and conventions of the international community, and that includes respecting state sovereignty. It includes opposing militant non-state actors, promoting collective solutions to some of the challenges that the international community faces, many of which are, in fact, global in nature. It also includes not interfering in the affairs of our neighbors. And we're also strong believers in the power and efficacy of constructive dialogue and diplomacy. So based on these pillars, we, really going back 2 years at this point, have had several rounds of conversations of dialogue with Iranian officials. Some of it was conducted, obviously, with the help of some of our neighbors, including Iraq and Oman. But just a couple of weeks ago, on March 10th to be exact, we had an announcement that included Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the People's Republic of China. We had several days of talks under the auspices of President Xi. And based on those talks, we released a statement. And as you said, there were statements said that we will be restoring diplomatic relations with Iran and opening our embassies in about 2 months. And that we will also implement a couple of agreements that go back a couple of decades at this point. So we're hopeful that this represents a new chapter in our relations with Iran going forward.
I like how you say take a broader lens. What I hear you saying is this Vision 2030 project is obviously it's transforming Saudi Arabia, is moving into new directions. I really like your reference to change ways of delivering government services, which essentially governance, which is a high priority, I think, as part of the Vision 2030.
Sure.
In the Western media, let's say U.S., they take a look at this, and many commentators sort of see this as a zero-sum game. I don't think Lucian or I really feel like that's the case, and some of the brighter people that we follow, haven't really felt like that was the case. But it is curious, as you note, that you had meetings and interaction, communications with Iran under the auspices of Iraq and Oman, but when it came to sort of take it over the goal line, as it were, China is the one who it'll be under the auspices of China. Was there intention behind that? Was that circumstance? What was that? What led to that result?
So I think all the rounds of conversations that we've had were important and played a role in bringing us to this moment. Having said that, I'm glad that you used the expression zero-sum game because, like yourself, I've come across many articles and commentary since the announcement was made, but I could not agree with you more. Saudi Arabia's foreign policy is not conducted through that prism. We do not conduct our foreign policies through that zero-sum game prism in the sense that if we restore relations with a country or if we strengthen relations with another country, those measures are not coming at the expense of relations with other countries. We believe that, and again, because of the fact that we adhere strictly to the norms of the international community, that we have had and continue to enjoy good, if not excellent, relations with countries around the world, with the overwhelming majority of countries around the world, I might add. And then China happens to be one of these nations that we have good relations with. China, as you know, is our biggest trading partner. It is also one of the biggest export markets for our crude. There's significant Chinese investments in Saudi Arabia and significant Saudi investments in China. So it makes perfect sense, certainly for those reasons, but also for other reasons for Saudi Arabia to strengthen this relationship. But again, I cannot stress this enough, that as we strengthen relations with countries like China or others in the region or elsewhere, these are not coming at the expense of our long-standing relationships with the United States and some of our other allies.
Taking a step back, I'm going to ask you a hypothetical, and all responsible interlocutors and spokespeople never answer a hypothetical. But
that's very true.
This is, over the last 18 months, it's something we talk about in the 966 regularly. And on segments we have specifically devoted to this, there's been an effort on the part of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in particular, but the Saudi political establishment and the brain trust, as it were, to deconflict. relationships in the region that may have been problematic, or they've been a little contentious. Qatar, Turkey, even Iraq. The relationship with Iraq is being rebuilt in a significant way that it hasn't seen in 20 years. And I guess you can see this as part of it. Here's the hypothetical. Mm-hmm. What are the expectations of a relationship with Iran under this new format, under this new with renewed diplomatic relations? And again, they had diplomatic relations in 2016, but what are the expectations? And again, I'll go back to Western media and U.S. in particular, because everyone jumps immediately to Yemen. Mm-hmm. And as is often the case, people get way out ahead of themselves and feel like, oh, this will resolve the Yemen issue. But I don't want to put ideas in, what does Saudi Arabia hope to come from this?
Right. So that's a great question. And it's not really a hypothetical. So since you mentioned Yemen specifically, let me just reiterate what the kingdom is doing there. And Saudi Arabia really is doing everything that it can to restore peace and stability to Yemen. It has been supportive of the internationally recognized government of Yemen going back to the beginning of this conflict, going back to 2014. It is working very closely with the United Nations and its envoy to find a political resolution. It is working very closely with the U.S. envoy to find a political resolution to this conflict. In addition to that, as you probably know, Saudi Arabia is the top provider of humanitarian assistance to Yemen going back since the beginning of the conflict. I believe the latest figure is upwards of $18 billion, and that's billion with a B. And this support has been in the form of food, medicine, support to internally displaced people, support to the central bank. We have also the development program that is supported by Saudi Arabia in Yemen under the King Salman Center for Humanitarian Assistance. That has already is in some ways helping Yemen along its recovery from this conflict. So they have built schools and hospitals and power stations, water treatment plants, among other institutions. So I think we're doing everything in that regard. Now, going back to your original hypothetical question, Saudi Arabia, like I said, we don't think that it's a big ask for us to, or rather for our neighbors to adhere to the same norms that we have adhered to for decades. And I think that if we do that, then the world becomes a safer, more prosperous place. And, going back to Vision 2030, which is what I started this conversation with, in many ways, obviously, it's very much focused on transforming Saudi Arabia's economy and society. But some of our ambitions go a little beyond that. So, for instance, we want to transform Saudi Arabia to become a logistics hub. We want to transform Saudi Arabia to become a global tourist destination. We want to become a global leader on climate action and mitigating the impact of climate change. So for all of these objectives to go as planned, we need peace, prosperity, and stability in the region. And again, going forward, we're hoping that Iran can become a force for peace and stability in the region and beyond.
And it is fascinating. You started with it, and now you've just circled back to it, and that is preservation, protection of the Vision 2030 project. And it sounds like that's the motivating factor, perhaps, between a lot of what's driving Saudi efforts to calm the region. One of the things that worries Saudi Arabia is there are some tertiary, you had the primary participants in this agreement: Saudi Arabia, Iran, China. You had significant impact, according to some people, with the U.S. I'm not so sure about that. But another party to this, watching closely, is Israel. And they have a different relationship with Iran, and they see things differently. Does this impact in any way going forward? You think your future interactions with Israel. And I'm not saying that they're coming. I'm just saying that, Saudi Arabia is a little more open to commercial or tourist interaction with Israel. Any bigger questions?
So that's more of a hypothetical than your previous question.
It is. So, I would say much more, Fahad.
Yes, but I'd be remiss if I did not address just the state of Saudi-US relations. And I think it's important, just given the amount of articles and commentaries that have been produced and published over the past couple of weeks. And again, I can't stress this enough. The relationship with the United States is longstanding. It is multidimensional. It has continued to grow and to strengthen, going back now 8 decades under both Republican and Democratic administrations. So, as I mentioned earlier, as we strengthen some relations with our neighbors in the region and beyond, this is not hampering our relationship with the United States in any way. I mean, if nothing else, obviously you must have seen the announcement by Boeing that it has agreed, or rather Saudi Arabia and Boeing agreed on a major deal to purchase well over 100 commercial jets for both the Saudi flagship airline, but also the new Riyadh airline that was just announced by His Royal Highness not long ago. So that should serve, I think, should serve as a reminder about the importance and the multidimensional nature of this relationship. And again, this is according to the U.S. government's own estimates. Even before this deal was agreed to, the annual trade between Saudi Arabia and the United States in goods and services supports 165,000 American jobs. This deal alone is expected to support over 100,000 jobs in the United States going back, continuing for several years. So this is a mutually beneficial relationship. And even though, like any relationship, not just between nations, but frankly between people, it's bound to go through ups and downs. And I think it's normal and perhaps even healthy, or certainly expected, to have a slight difference of opinion over certain subjects, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Saudi Arabia and the United States are in broad alignment when it comes to some of the major challenges that we face in the region and beyond.
That was a really deft turn, Fahad. I like that, because then you reference logistics, and that's a $37 billion deal. Mm-hmm. That Riyadh Air, committing to 39 aircraft, and Saudi committing to 39 Boeing, wide bodies. An extraordinary agreement. Again, announced not long after the announcement of the agreement with China, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Now, we don't have a lot of your time, so now I'm going to say something, and you can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or forget it, Richard. Lucian. It appears to me, and I think Lucian and I talk a lot about this on the show, and we talk about it with each other. We reached a low point at the in the 2020 presidential campaign when current President Biden referred to used the term pariah. We had so let's not use that as a touchstone, but let's use the visit to Saudi Arabia this summer. President Biden visited and met with Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and others. It appears to me that the relationship is in a better spot now than it was then. Now, you and I both know, we all know on this podcast, that there's significant infrastructure in the relationship in terms of ongoing cooperative ventures, in terms of, private sector, defense, intelligence, any number of things that bind and are ongoing, no matter what the political, froth is. Mm-hmm. But it appears to me that the two countries are in a better place at the political level. And that's just my observation. Yeah, now you can say, I want no part of that. Or you can say, well, maybe not.
No, I mean, what I will say is that I agree with everything that you said in the sense that, this is a longstanding relationship, that our cooperation on multiple dimensions, as you mentioned, has been moving, regardless if whether we did have some, slight difference of opinion over political issues. So for instance, the economic aspect of the relationship that has continued to broaden and to deepen going back decades. Our military and security cooperation has been steady and consistent going back decades. So, I think it's important to remember that Saudi Arabia and the United States have fought two wars side by side, not just one. One going back to 1990, when we expelled Saddam Hussein's troops from Kuwait, and more recently going back to 2014, when again our troops fought side by side to expel the terrorist group ISIS from Iraq and Syria. At the same time, there's an important people-to-people dimension to this relationship that is also sometimes overlooked. So as we speak, there's an estimated 70,000 Americans living and working in Saudi Arabia. There's an estimated 30,000, if not more, Saudis studying and living in the United States. And they, in many ways, also, this people-to-people dimension adds depth to this relationship. I think it has been one of the key pillars and has been one of the main factors why it has endured for as long as it has. So, it was a long answer, obviously, but I feel very good about the relationship. I think it's on solid footing, and we look forward to it continuing, not just continuing, but expanding. And since you mentioned President Biden's visit, in many ways, that visit reinforced the pillars of the relationship that have sustained it going back 80 years, but it also outlined the contours of the relationship going forward. So as you know, now this relationship has broadened to include things like cybersecurity, food security, space exploration, some of these climate change, some of these new challenges that both our countries face.
And Lucian will certainly chime in here. He's been spending a lot of time in Saudi and the region. We're gonna have James Golson on in a couple episodes. He's the senior commercial officer with the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, and had a chance to visit with him out there, as well as members of the AmCham KSA. There seems to be really good energy on the private sector side.
Yeah, and as I don't know if I mentioned this during my previous appearance, but I've had the pleasure of attending FII a couple of years, which is a Future Investment Initiative conference that happens in Riyadh in the fall every year. And I was there last 2 years ago, and there were literally thousands of business leaders from all over the world, including people representing, dozens and dozens of, if not hundreds of American companies. So I think it's become very clear to me, and I visit the kingdom pretty often. I was just there last week, and it's very clear to me that there's a lot of interest, not just from the business community in the United States or more broadly internationally, in what's happening in Saudi Arabia. I think people realize that for the business community, for sure, they realize that there's maybe more opportunities in Saudi Arabia now than anywhere else in the world. But I think beyond the business community, I think Americans certainly in general do seem very much interested in what's happening in the kingdom. They realize that there's something happening, and more of them are not only just engaging with us here at the embassy, but more and more of them are actually going through the effort and taking the time to go and visit Saudi Arabia and to see things on the ground, to speak to our youth who are leading this amazing transformation. So I think this is a very exciting time in Saudi Arabia, and this relationship with the United States it's endured for many compelling reasons.
Fahad, we've already taken up a little bit too much of your time, but if I could ask you just one question, a quick answer. Are you Michael Ratney is the new U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, so he would sort of be HRH, Princess Rima's counterpart. Do you know him personally, or is there sort of excitement for that? We know things move slowly through Congress, but it looks like that finally got through. So wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I mean, obviously it's important to have an ambassador, and Martina Strong has been there and was previously there in the kingdom, and she was engaging with her counterparts. But like I said, it's important to have an ambassador. Our ambassador here is very much engaged. She travels all across the country. She maintains an ongoing dialogue with the administration, but also with the leadership in Congress on both sides of the aisle. So obviously, it's good to have as many diplomats as possible.
We are huge fans of her here on the 966. Fahad Nazer, who is spokesperson for the Embassy of Saudi Arabia in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.